Welcome to The Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hi, I'm bela.and.mike, coming to you from upstate New York. I am a former three-time entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and business school professor.
And I'm Mike Wasserman, Professor of International Management at the Münster University of Applied Sciences in Münster, Germany. Thanks for joining us today. When Bela and I were both on the faculty at Clarkson University, we would have lots of interesting conversations about how two of our favorite topics, innovation and entrepreneurship, are constantly evolving. We do this over coffee or lunch as time allowed. But about 2 years ago, I moved to Germany, and a little later, Bela retired. But Bela had this idea to continue these conversations in the form of a podcast. I thought this was a ridiculous idea. I'm not a podcast guy. I don't like the way my voice sounds. I was really skeptical. But we've now done over 70 episodes, and we've had a blast, haven't we, Bela?
Boy, we sure have, Mike. And we invite our listeners to join us each week as we talk with interesting entrepreneurs to share their stories and ideas. Our goal is to bring you individuals who have taken the unconventional path to find happiness in life and at work. One of the key elements of this podcast is to interview business founders we can all identify with. Our guests have included coffee roasters, software developers, business consultants, and restaurant owners. We want their stories to inspire you to say, hey, I can do that, and then just maybe give you the push to start your own entrepreneurial adventure.
And today we add an ocean sailor to that list, Bela, which I'm excited about. But before we begin, we'd like to share with you that our podcast is brought to you in part by the law firm of Phillips Lytle, LLP. This is a sponsorship that makes a lot of sense to us. Bela, you know this firm well, don't you?
I sure do. I have worked with the key entrepreneurship partners at Phillips Lytle for over 20 years. Their attorneys take an entrepreneurial approach to legal matters and have a long history of success with startups. We thank Phillips Lytle for their support of this podcast and the entrepreneurial community. Today's guest is Andy Schell, founder of 59 North, a company that offers guided trips for people who want to sail long distances across oceans. I have been listening to Andy's podcast since day one, and in many ways, he was the inspiration for me to convince Mike that we should do a podcast, although a bit on a different topic. So let's listen to Andy and the conversation he and I had.
Hey, how's it going, Bela?
Good morning, Andy.
Yes.
Morning here.
So am I pronouncing your name right? Is it Bela?
It's Bela.
Bela. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. Yep.
Yeah.
It's one of those, I'm Hungarian.
Okay.
And so it's like Bela Fleck, if you ever heard of him.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's Bela is one of those Hungarian names that does not have an English translation.
That's cool. Is it true that Hungarian, the only language that it shares like a root with is Finnish? Is that true?
Yes, that is true. So it has, I think there are some Finns who came down south for warmer weather. And
Smart.
They, a long time ago and helped to establish the language there, yeah. Or had certainly had an influence on it.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, we're so close to Finland, but the language between Swedish and Finnish, I mean, it couldn't be any more different.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's amazing, right? You're right next door to each other, and it's different, and other places have a big impact that are really far away.
Yeah. Cool. I'm ready to go. If you are, I'm recording on my end. So anytime you're ready, let her roll.
Okay, so perfect. Let me just do a quick intro. Hello, listeners. Today I'm here with Andy Schell, who is just a fabulous example of an entrepreneur who has turned his passion into a business. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So, Andy, if you are at a social event and you're introducing yourself to someone and they ask you what you do, how do you answer that question?
I guess I say I own my own business, first of all. And then if people are interested in hearing what that means, then I go into, okay, well, we have a sailing business, and if anybody's interested in that, then, oh yeah, well, it's ocean sailing. It's this niche sort of thing where we, in a nutshell, we take people on these long distance ocean passages to see what it's like out there in the wilderness. But I think from a high view, I would call myself an entrepreneur, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. So as my mother-in-law would say, Really? You can make that into a business?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd recommend it. It's interesting. I mean, this is maybe going deeper than you wanted to right off the bat, but it's been. I'm sort of on a break right now because I'm home at my farm in Sweden, and I'm realizing now that I'm sort of off, the pressure's off a little bit, how much I need a break. It's been I read a quote this morning that was something along the lines of, be careful what you choose as your profession, because it's what's going to keep you up at night when you're not supposed to be working. And that's 100% true. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, it is something. I think you can make a business out of anything, but be careful what you wish for, I guess, is how I feel about it right now.
Yeah, yeah. So let me try to understand how this business works. So people somehow contact you and say, hey, I'd like to learn how to sail offshore in the ocean, and you take them out and give them lessons for a period of time?
Yeah, so basically we get three types of customers, I would say. We get people that want to do this on their own boat. So they have this dream to go off cruising. The classic cruising dream is sell everything you have, your car, your house, whatever, and move on to a boat and kind of downsize and sail around the world indefinitely. Not necessarily around the world, but sail in the world indefinitely. And those are the kind of people that we get that usually sail with us once, because they're either in the process of buying a boat, or sometimes they're building a boat, or they're in this transition zone. And first of all, they want to know, A, what is this actually going to be like to go on a long distance ocean passage? And B, is it really for them? The smartest people are the ones that book with us before spending a ton of money on their own boat or their own plans, because we've had not many, because most people that are in the mindset that they think they're going to like this end up liking it. But occasionally we get somebody that's like, wow, I'm really glad I did this. I don't need to do that again. And then our second type of customer is sort of the opposite of that. They're usually men, and they're usually, occasionally it's women as well that are in this situation where their partner or the rest of their family is not interested in sailing long distance. And they realize that if I want to scratch this itch, I'm going to have to do it with someone else, because it's not practical to do it on my own if my family's not fully invested in it. And those are the people that usually sail with us multiple times, sometimes once or twice a year even, and they kind of scratch that long-distance sailing itch. And then sometimes the third type is like a family that is interested in sailing but knows what it takes to get a boat outfitted to go on these long-distance ocean passages, and that they don't want to do that. So they keep a coastal cruiser somewhere, and then they come with us now and then to sort of scratch that itch as a compromise, so to speak. And where they come from, this all started with my podcast back in 2013, and I guess I've done a pretty good job of creating the excitement around this, and that's how most of the people find us, is through the podcast that I host, where I interview other sailors that I want to learn from.
Right. So I've been a long-time listener of your podcast. I think yours is one of the early podcasts that got me hooked on listening to podcasts, and in many ways inspired me to start this one. So I thank you for that.
I'm glad you started it, because I think we had an email conversation about, I always thought it would be cool to do just a straight up entrepreneurship podcast, but I never took the time to do it. So I'm glad that you got inspired and decided to do that, because this is something I was interested in. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to yours now, because it's something I'm interested in just in general.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So as you were telling me about your customers, it got me to thinking about, so you're going out and you're sailing hundreds or maybe 1,000 or 2 miles in the ocean. And so the people that are with you, it's sort of important that, they're not going to on day 3 say, get me off of this boat, I'm going nuts, or that they have the right skill level, because you're all sort of dependent upon each other. So how do you sort of, I'll use the word pick or select your customers?
Yeah, well, thankfully we don't really have to. It's sort of self-selecting for whatever reason, and if I'm feeling good about myself, I say, well, I guess we've done a good job with our marketing, that it's sort of self-screening, where we try to not lower expectations, but basically set realistic expectations that this is an adventure. It's not a cruise. It's a working trip. It's all this. It's the real thing. It's an authentic experience, and thankfully, most people that come into it, like I said before, they may have never been offshore, but they understand they understand philosophically what they think they're getting into, and they have the right mindset for it. And funnily enough, I forget who came up with this, but most of our people come as individuals, not as a group or with a friend or whatever. So we have a frequently asked questions section on our website, and the first one says, "How can you be sure I'm going to get along with everyone else?" And the answer, it's a joke, but it's true. It's because you have to. So going in, I think you got to have people, for whatever reason, maybe because of that expectations thing, have this idea that they have to get along with everyone, and it's not just it's not by accident that people get along with each other. It's part of how we have to be as leaders on the boat in kind of creating that team building atmosphere. But it's also setting the expectations up front that you might not ever see or talk to this person ashore, but for the week or two that we're at sea, they're all you got, and you got to be able to lean on everybody. And I would say further to that, like the most important aspect of a crew member that I want is I don't care about experience, because I'm confident in my own ability that I can teach people the way I like to do things. So I want somebody that is humble enough to ask questions and not think they have all the answers. The most dangerous type of crew member, and we've had a handful of these, thankfully not more than a handful, where you get somebody that thinks they know what they're doing but actually doesn't, and that's where it's dangerous, because they can do things without asking because they think they know the right answer, and then they break the boat or hurt somebody else or worse. So that sort of humility and the confidence, I guess, to ask questions is what I look for most in a good crew member.
Yeah, excellent. So let's go back. Let's go back to Andy Schell as a young lad. If I remember from listening to some of your podcast, you went to Penn State, and you went there to sort of play golf.
Yeah, I actually started university. My first semester was down in Myrtle Beach in a place called Coastal Carolina, the Chanticleers, and they had this PGA professional program down there. It was like at the time anyway, there was about a dozen schools in the country that had a partnership with the PGA of America, where you would get a college degree, usually related to business or tourism or something like that, combined with your PGA professional card. So not like a touring pro, but a teaching pro, to teach at a PGA accredited facility or run a PGA accredited facility. So I started down there because I was really into the golf thing, and I didn't like it. I'm from Pennsylvania, and it was like 8 hours drive away, and I realized that I was sort of thrust out of pixie land, so to speak, and I didn't like being away from home. And I didn't like the school that much, but I think that was just an excuse for I was homesick and I wasn't comfortable down there. So a couple of my best friends from high school were at Penn State, and I had no intention of going to Penn State whatsoever. In fact, growing up, being from Pennsylvania and surrounded by that sort of Penn State football fandom, I hated it. I hated that whole scene. I didn't want anything to do with it. And then I went up to Penn State Thanksgiving break of my freshman year, when I wasn't happy down at Coastal, and I was with my best friends, and I was like, all right, this is stupid. I'll just come here. And I had applied to Penn State, so I already had gotten accepted, so it was an easy transfer. So my second semester, right after Christmas, I left Coastal, and I wound up at Penn State, who also happened to have this same golf program. And that's kind of how I got started in college. But, man, that feels like a lifetime ago now.
And so you made this transition from golf to something else. And so talk about that. How did that happen?
Looking back on it from a distance now, I don't think it would have mattered what I went to college for. I'm grateful for the college experience. Like, I think that was a big part of that, actually sort of sparked my travel bug. Because when I went to college, I did my summer after my freshman year, I went to Costa Rica for a month to do this volunteer thing, and that was the first time I'd traveled abroad by myself. And I always knew I wanted to do a semester abroad, and I wound up in Australia my junior year. But I bounced around, like after the golf, I did the golf thing for a year, and I realized, this isn't really for me. It requires too much dedication to maintain the playing level and the school, the academic stuff behind it. I didn't have enough passion for it to continue it. And then I kind of I changed majors to history for a little bit. I even majored in international German and international business for a time. I think I changed like 6 different times, and I wound up sort of by default back in the recreation, parks, and tourism management department with a major in commercial tourism, which is appropriate now in hindsight. But the only reason I wound up in that is because I was offered a spot in the Schreier Honors College, but I had to be in that. Like, I guess they allocated so many spots to different colleges within Penn State, and they said, well, if you stay in tourism, you can get a spot in Schreier, and that kind of Schreier it's pretty prestigious part of Penn State, and it allowed me to sort of decide what I wanted to pick class-wise on my senior year. You kind of wrote a senior thesis that you could be very flexible in, so it gave me some flexibility to just explore whatever I felt like studying, as opposed to being rigid in the tourism program. But where I was going with this, it wouldn't have mattered. I think my path would have wound up here anyway, because I'm the kind of person that I can't find the motivation to work on something unless I'm 100% believe in it. And that's a downfall sometimes, because it means that sometimes when I want to break, like right now, I can't help myself but to work on stuff. So I think I don't know how much the Penn State experience or my college experience really dictated where I'd end up, sort of in the bigger picture. But it was a nice way to get to where I'm going, I guess.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Was there a kind of moment in your life where you sort of had this vision of clarity that says, this is what I want to do? I want to do something in the sailing industry, or I want to have my own boat. I want to take people out.
I think when you say that, the very first thing that comes to mind, and I don't think I realized it at the time, but when I was a teenager, I mean, I grew up sailing on my mom and dad's boats, and we'd do these father-son sailing trips in the summer ever since I was 5 years old. And I remember my dad telling me that I wasn't really that interested in the actual like art of sailing the boat. Like, we'd go on these trips on the Chesapeake, and when we went to the Bahamas when I was 9, they took us out of school for a year. And I remember really enjoying the traveling part of it, but I don't recall ever being that interested in like sail trim and all this stuff. But then I do recall when I was a teenager, I got interested in wanting to dock the boat. And I was like, hey, Dad, and at the time we had a 42-foot catch, which was a pretty big boat. And my dad would let me bring it in and out of the dock in Rock Hall, Maryland, where we kept it. And I guess that's kind of the first time where I realized, like, wow, like this is really cool to be able to operate my own boat. And I think even from then, I just thought like this is something I wanted to do. But even back in high school, I did a project with my dad on like, I mean, I'm from countryside Pennsylvania. Sailing was not on the top of anybody's mind. People had no idea what it was. But I did this high school project on like knot tying and navigation and stuff like that. And I think that's just what I was like most interested in. You know, I had the Lego pirate ship when I was a kid. I got it for my birthday when I was 10. So like I think just behind all the other experiences I had in my life, the one constant was always being around boats, and I just think it sort of was baked in. And I don't think there was like a epiphany where it was like I'm gonna set up a business doing this, but it just was always there in the background that I just kind of almost felt like this is like instinctually this is the right way to go.
Yes. So you also took a trip to Australia, that part of the world that really changed your life. So what was sort of the motivation for doing that, and how did that turn out?
Well, there were 2 trips. The Australia one was I did a semester abroad at Penn State, and I don't know if that was life-changing at the time or if it was just like it felt like I did it more for fun. It was kind of I was studying tourism. It was not very difficult subject matter for me. I set up my classes so I could do class 2 or 3 days a week and had the rest of the time off. So that was really a 6-month vacation in Australia, and it was fun. It was neat seeing, you know, but even Australia, like it's not that exotic. It's English speaking. It's similar, different culture, but still I wasn't that much out of my element. So that really felt more like a vacation than anything else. But the real life-changing trip actually came right after I graduated, where I knew when I went to Australia in college, I stopped in New Zealand on the way there and traveled for 2 weeks. And I was like, wow, I really like it here. This is great. I need to go back to New Zealand. So I did that after I graduated college. and before I started working for real. And I had a job lined up. I just said, hey, I need to go do this backpacking trip before I start real life. And they let me, it was at the Woodwind, they let me take 2 months before I started. And anyway, that trip is where I met Mia, who's now my wife. And that was the truly, from that trip, I met my wife and I met two of my best friends. That still to this day are 15 years later, 13 years later are my best friends. And that was really where I felt like I found myself in the world, so to speak. And I think when you travel, particularly by yourself, you can be whoever you want to be. And there's no I grew up in high school and I was a very different person on that trip than I was in high school. And I think part of it was because I was able to just truly be myself, not whoever I wanted to be, but like I didn't have to pretend to be anybody else like I think I did in high school a bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a question because I've listened to your podcast, I think every one of them, and sometimes I find you to be a very intriguing and sort of philosophical person, and I do a little bit of sailing. I've done a small handful of overnight passages, so I've experienced the wonderment of sitting up in the cockpit at 2 a.m. in the morning and just sort of absorbing everything that's around you. And sometimes your mind thinks about stuff. And so one of the questions I had for you was, we make decisions in life and opportunities present themselves to us, and sometimes we act on them and sometimes we don't. Do you sort of have a philosophy about that? Right?
Yes.
I mean, you went to New Zealand, right? You sort of met this person, right? You decided to further that relationship, and those are all sort of sometimes at the moment very minor little decisions, but they have a huge impact on your life.
Yeah, and I do have a philosophy on that, and I have a story that just very recently sort of reinforced my philosophy on this, which I'll share in a second. But to start this out, I mean, this all comes from my mom. Everything I'm about to say is entirely from my mom, who was the philosopher in the family, who, as you know from listening to the podcast, passed away in 2012. She died of brain cancer. But she had written me a note on that first trip that I went to New Zealand before I left, and I kept in my backpack, and I found it a couple years ago, when we were in the process of moving our stuff from the U.S. to Sweden. I found this note that she had written, and one of the lines in the note said, "Hold fast to your dreams." And hold fast is an old school, sailor tradition. And I just thought that was really cool that she had written that, "Hold fast to your dreams." And after she died, I had my tattoo artist in Sweden took her handwriting and created a tattoo out of that I have on my wrist that's drawn in such a way that when I hold my arm up, I can read it. I'm looking at it right now. And I think the bigger picture of that with my philosophy is just always follow your gut. Like, I don't think, and this is where, when I said before about that, the boating stuff just being in the background, like, I just if I have an overarching philosophy, it is trust your feelings. And I'm a very emotional person, and I get that from my mom as well. But that emotion and that gut feeling has always, for better or worse, dictated how I make my decisions. And when I say worse, I mean I would say the worst decisions I've made were ones that went against my gut in the name of like rationality or logic, because it's not always logical or rational why you have a gut feeling one way or another. But I've learned, and the story I'm going to tell now most recently to reinforce that, we were coming back from Guadeloupe, leaving Ice Bear. So Mia and I were coming home and not going back to the boat for a while because Mia's pregnant and she's due to have a baby in May, and that's like a big new part of my life. But anyway, we were getting ready to leave, and like 10 days before we were supposed to leave, Mia fell on the boat and badly sprained her ankle. And we spent the day in the hospital, thought it was broken. It turns out it wasn't. But long story short, we were supposed to fly out on a Wednesday, and she had a doctor's appointment that Monday, a follow-up on her ankle, and it was still really swollen, and the doctor didn't want her to fly. And he's like, "I want to see you again Thursday." And we were supposed to fly out Wednesday. So I was like, crap. And we were supposed to teach a a course in Annapolis that weekend, and we had planned this all, months before, and thought we were real smart about being efficient. And okay, we'll wrap up the boat there. We'll fly home to Annapolis, do this workshop, spend a week with our family, and then fly home to Sweden, and then we'll stay there till the baby's born. So when her ankle got hurt and the doctor wouldn't let her fly, it's like all of a sudden, well, crap, this throws a monkey wrench in our plans. And logically, we had friends in Guadeloupe. There was no reason that I couldn't go home without Mia. That I was just, I can go home, do the workshop. She can stay with friends that were on a different boat, Ryan and Sophie, and go to as many doctor's appointments as she needed. There was no reason for her to have to go home, and it would have worked out fine. So that's what we said we'd do. But I had this strong feeling that like I need to stay here, not for Mia at all, because she's like the strongest person I know. She would have been completely fine. It was more for me. I felt this emotional connection that like I need to be here for myself. Like I can't just philosophically, it wasn't sitting right with me, and there's no other explanation needed besides that. I had a bad gut feeling. So I go to the airport and I go through security, and I'm sitting there. She dropped me off at the airport, and I walk down the jetway to get on the plane. I always am like the last person to board a flight. And I'm walking down there, and I got halfway down the jetway, and I was like, I can't get on this plane. I just cannot get on this plane. So I turned around, and I went back out, and meanwhile, we're in Guadeloupe, which is French Caribbean. No one speaks English. I go back out to the desk, and the lady's like looking at me like, what are you doing? And I said, I can't get on the flight. I tried to explain like, what the situation was. And she said, okay. And I had checked the bag, so they wouldn't let the plane leave before they got my bag off the plane. And I was like so close to just crying my brains out right there. I just could barely stand it. And then I got in a taxi, went back to the marina. Mia was there to meet me, and then I released all this pent up emotion. But the point of this story is, halfway down that jetway, I said to myself, God damn it, like if I can't practice what I preach of following this gut feeling stuff, then what am I doing? What is the point of all this? And I said, you know what? I'm putting my foot down. I have a bad feeling about this. I don't know why, and it doesn't matter. And I stayed, and I'm so glad I did. And ultimately, we ended up flying out the next day, and we did everything we were supposed to do. Nothing got messed up, but that doesn't even matter. It didn't matter if it would have gotten messed up. The point is, I had such a strong feeling that I couldn't explain, and I'm so glad that I followed it, because that's been my philosophy all along. And it's like, it just reinforced that, okay, I know how I need to make decisions going forward, and this is it.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, I think you're the 76th, will be the 76th episode for my podcast, and I've talked to all entrepreneurs, and I would say that that's a common trait that has emerged in my conversations, right, of this.
That's cool.
Yeah, people sort of really taking a lot of credence and value in their gut feelings, and understanding that that's an important element of their decision-making process.
Yeah, and I think that you also, like, in order to stick to that philosophy, you have to be willing to accept like the unknown, and accept that you might not have, like, I don't believe in fate or any of this like preordained stuff. I don't believe that either, but I do believe that if you have a certain emotional state of mind or whatever, that you some people are just attuned to, like, I guess, instincts that you don't have any rational explanation for, but sometimes they're not, like, sometimes it doesn't turn out well. That could have wound up being that Mia was going to be stuck in Guadeloupe for another week, and we would have had to cancel our workshop and all the other stuff. But if you can accept the consequences of sticking to that philosophy, I think that's an important part about it, because if you can't accept that, then you lose sort of the clarity of that feeling when you do have a good gut feeling. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but
yeah. Well, I also think there's for some individuals, there's this desire to explore the unknown, and sort of not knowing exactly what's around the corner. Right. So I know that drives me, right. I like that notion of curiosity, of sort of okay, I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen if I make this decision. But that to me is part of the excitement of it, versus if I walk through that door, I know exactly what's on the other side. And
Yeah, but
whereas
actually you
I-
don't. Like that's the secret. Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Like that's where the rationality sort of goes out the window. Is I agree with you. Like I like not knowing what's happening, but embracing the unknown, I think, is like nobody knows what's going to happen. So it doesn't matter whether you embrace the unknown, or embrace the quote known. There actually nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow anyway. So you might as well embrace the unknown.
Exactly, right? So you might as well be positive about it as opposed to being fearful about it
Yeah, exactly.
and having it drive you nuts. Yeah. So so you met Mia, and then you had a job, and you started working in sort of the sailing industry. And at what point did you say, I want to sort of do this on my own?
So there was when I worked for the Woodwind, I guess part of my Penn State experience that directly affected my path going forward was the fact that to graduate with this tourism degree, you had to do a 12-credit internship on site somewhere. So that summer of my senior year is when I got an internship working at the Woodwind, and I was working 4 days a week as a crew member on the boat, as a deckhand on the boat. And 1 day a week, it was a small family-run business, so I was doing whatever. Like I would go to the Sam's Club with the van and stock up on soda for the week. I'd run the dock office. I'd work in the business office, just learning all parts of the business. And that very directly influenced how we run our business today. That was excellent experience for doing what we do now. But they were the ones that after I graduated, they hired me and said, you can start after your trip to New Zealand. And so when I got back, the boats don't sail in the winter. So from February until April, I was in the business office, and my friends that were deckhands on the boat the previous summer, some of them stayed and were working winter maintenance, which I had no interest in. And I was like, oh, this is great. I get to work in the business office, and this is fun. I was doing a bunch of marketing stuff. And but then when April came around and they launched the boats, now I was only 1 day a week on the boat, 4 days a week in the business office. And I was like, I'm not cut out for this. I need to be out in the world actually doing stuff. And then I, after a few months, I said, can I please have my old deckhand job back? And I did. And that was sort of that was probably the first time I realized, like, oh, wait a minute, I could actually probably make a living actually sailing as opposed to working in sailing. So that was kind of the first, like, oh yeah, people have captain's licenses and get paid to do this. And that was sort of clarification of this underlying background boating sailing sort of foundation that I had as grown up as a kid. It just provided clarity to, like, oh, here's a career path to actually do something with that. And that was when I decided I'm going to work in the field as opposed to behind a desk somewhere. Mm-hmm. And that was the start of that.
But then still that's different, right? Then there's this notion of, I'm going to have my own business. I'm going to buy my own boat. I'm going to do this, right? And there's not a lot of other models out there. There's not 100 people who do this that you can then sort of model yourself after. So when did that happen?
Also on the Woodwind, a friend introduced, one of the crew members, Pete, who I worked with, gave me a book by John Kretschmer, who's been a mentor of mine. And his was the model that I copied, kind of. He had a boat and took people ocean sailing. And prior to that, he had done a bunch of deliveries. And by reading him and Bernard Moitessier, who's a famous French single-handed sailor from the 60s, reading all these old romantic accounts of people crossing oceans on small boats, I was fascinated with ocean sailing specifically. And I had never done that growing up when we sailed to the Bahamas, but that was all coastal to get there down the coast of Florida and across. So I had this fascination of sailing out of sight of land and being at sea, for 24/7 and experiencing that, and I hadn't yet done that. So doing boat deliveries was like the way to kind of get into that world. So while I was working on the Woodwind, in the off season in the fall, I tried to get volunteer as a crew member on anything I could find, and I did. I got my foot in the door on a boat that was going from Charleston down to Tortola. So my dad came along on that, and that was the first time where I actually got to sail out of sight of land. And I think it was a 10-day trip, and that was like solidified my idea that, whoa, this is a whole different kind of sailing, and this is like really what I want to do. And besides that, I didn't like being on someone else's schedule, just in general. I like being able to make my own rules and make my own schedule and kind of be in charge of my own life. And by being a delivery captain, that was sort of halfway between working on the Woodwind, where I was sailing to their schedule, and what we're doing now, because, deliveries it was feast or famine, right? You had so everything was last minute. It was on a boat you didn't know, but once you got the job, then it was up to you to get the boat ready and sail from A to B. So I liked that part of it. I liked the part of it where it wasn't somebody telling me what the schedule was going to be. It was me figuring it out. But it was also tough because you never knew when the work was going to come. And then out of that, I think I always, and I don't know where it comes from, but I always wanted to have my own boat because of that freedom to do what we're doing now. And that kind of just, I got the experience ocean sailing on these other deliveries. And then Mia and I bought our own boat in 2008, and we sailed it to Sweden. And we deliberately did so because we wanted to have some sort of, it was like building a resume, right? We wanted to do this big giant trip that would give us some credibility when we were trying to find deliveries and do this other stuff. It's like, oh yeah, we've been out there, we did this on our own, and we worked hard for it. So that was a big part of this as well, I guess. And I realize as I'm saying this, I'm not giving a very clear answer to that trip, but I don't think there was one, other than that somehow deep down I knew that this is where it was all headed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because, again, some entrepreneurs I talk to sort of, in the shower or in a dream or somewhere have this sort of epiphany that says, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and they blaze out on it. And as I listen to you, you're a very successful entrepreneur, but it's been this very deliberate path that has taken you to where you are. And it's steps, and they're pretty big steps, but they're not like just one day I, sell the house, sell the car, sell everything, and I go do this, right?
I think the deliberate part of it, though, well, first of all, it depends on how you define success, which is another conversation. But the deliberate part of it, from my end, was I'm not a traditional entrepreneur in the sense of let me figure out how I can turn an idea into something that makes money. Like some entrepreneurs, I have a couple friends like this who they just, doesn't matter what the subject matter is, they just find ways to make something out of nothing. And I'm not like that at all. I am just all right, I've got a passion for something. How do I turn that passion into something that creates a lifestyle that I would want to do anyway, and B, a way to afford that lifestyle. So I think if I hadn't been quote unquote successful at setting up what we've done, I would have done, I don't know, it was forcing the economics into my passion as opposed to vice versa, finding something that you think will make money. And I think, ironically, that's probably how people become most successful, because it's truly built on passion as opposed to trying to force an idea.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, I think for the people who are successful and the people who are happy, it's about the passion, and the money is a consequence of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've always said when we talk about ideas to grow the business or do more stuff, it's, this sounds arrogant maybe, but I don't brainstorm, when we plan a passage calendar, for example, I'm not thinking about where people might want to go. I'm just thinking about where I want to go, and then I got to convince other people to come with me. It's not, and that in the business lingo, I guess it's the customer doesn't really know what they want. You have to tell them what they want, and that's been my attitude.
Yes. So you started with one boat, and now recently you added a second boat. And so I want to talk about growing the business a little bit. And, your podcast, I think, as you mentioned earlier, has played an instrumental role in sort of your marketing, right? It established you as a personality. It established you as an expert in the field. And I can imagine many people who come with you say, I want to go sailing with Andy. I want to go sail with this person. And now that you have two boats, that equation and formula changes a little bit. So how have you found that, and how do you think about that?
Well, that was the biggest challenge, but my plan all along wasn't, well, okay, so to back up a little bit, me and I were starting to think all right, what do we want to, this was last, I guess, 2018. So we were 4 seasons into the business with Eastbjorn, with the first boat. And we said, can we, and it was 6 to 9 months on the boat a year away. We were doing it together. So it was a great lifestyle for the two of us, but we started thinking like, are we going to do this for the next 20 years? Like, is this going to be it? Is this going to be our lifestyle for the next 20 years? And we started to think, well, we have so many other interests and we're so close to family that this being away all the time is really fun, but it's also difficult in a different sense. And then we started thinking, well, hey, if we were able to build this beyond just the two of us, could we see ourselves running a business just like this from a distance and then being able to sail when we wanted to? And we started thinking like, well, that could be a way forward, because I'm still really passionate about the whole business thing. And then I still get to sail when I wanted to. And then the model sort of switched from John Kretschmer's model, which was one boat, one person, that sort of larger-than-life personality, to this other guy, Skip Novak, who's also a larger-than-life personality, but he now has 2 boats and runs the business, but is not always on the boats. And he's created this way of exploring the world under sail that, like if I would sign up to go sailing with Skip Novak, I'm getting that whether or not he's on the boat. So I started thinking about how do I build this brand that has all this philosophy that I believe in? How do we trickle that down and provide that experience without physically being on the boat? And number one, obviously, is the people that you have to fulfill that. It's a very rare person that can. Lots of people can sail. It's a very rare person that can sail with such confidence and with such ease that they can take a group of novices from different backgrounds and get them safely and enjoyably across an ocean and be happy about it in the process. So that was really the biggest thing, is we got to get the right people that can deliver this. And partly we set this up so that we pay probably twice. I mean, there's not a lot of businesses that do what we do, first of all, but we pay sort of twice what the going rate is, because if we find the person that we want to keep them. And that was that's been a big foundation of the business in the first place, is getting those right people in place.
Right. So as you expand and grow the business, you add this other boat, you add other captains who are taking out your clients or customers. Have you sort of built a curriculum around that? So sort of, here's how we do this. I mean, is this going to be the Andy and Mia Ocean Sailing School?
No, and specifically, I don't want it to be a school. I don't want it to be curriculum based, because that's not what it's like in the real world. When I say we deliver these authentic experiences, it's similar to. There's a friend of ours that runs a business in Iceland called Aurora Arctica, and they have 2 boats, and they do these ski and sail trips in Iceland and these adventure trips in Greenland and stuff. And you go on a ski trip with them in Iceland, and you might not get any snow. It's just part of the adventure. So every single one of our trips is different, because the weather patterns are different, the seasons are different, the departure and arrival ports are different. Everything's different, so you can't really build a curriculum around that. And I don't like the word curriculum, because that's sort of, you can't plan. You have to adapt the way we run these trips. You have to adapt what is thrown at you, and you get what you get in reality when you're out there. And instead of creating a curriculum, I would say we've created a philosophy, and it's a higher viewpoint of it's like, how do we want to run a trip offshore? What is most important to us in these sort of things? Create that philosophy that our skippers and mates buy into, and then they can bring their own experiences to that. So, for example, August, who is the skipper on Eastbjorn now, he's from Bergen, he's from Norway. He's got all kinds of high latitude experience. He's been sailing up in Spitsbergen, up in the high Arctic for a long time. And he's got a skill set that's very similar to mine, but learned in a different way. So, and we both, we're both very passionate about traditional navigation and seamanship and all this stuff. And that's the high level philosophical stuff that we all have to be on the same page for. But at the detail level, he can run the trips however he wants to. In fact, I want him to do that. My ultimate goal would be that somebody can sail with 59 North, say one of these guys that sails with us year after year, and they may want to sail on a different boat with a different skipper each year, because each experience they're going to learn something a little bit different, because it's not the same curriculum. That's on purpose.
Got it. Very nice. So, what has been in this journey that you've taken? What's sort of been the most challenging thing that you've come up against?
Being able to relax.
Okay, so that brings up an excellent point, right? So, how do you strike that life work balance, particularly when you're working? It's 24/7 for whatever it is, 7 to 15 days, right? So how do you sort of get that downtime and that balance? And you're doing it with Mia, your spouse. So talk about that a little bit and how you sort of deal with that.
Oh, man, I'm still trying to figure that out, because the way that I've done this from the beginning, it's sort of a catch-22, because I've always said I don't want to work. So how can I create a career that doesn't feel like work? Well, I've done that now, and I've won that part of the game. But now the challenge is how do I step out of that? How do I relax? Because I still don't think of what I do as work. I really, really like it. I really like it, and I like it to the point where I can't not think about it. And it's two parts. It's like right now I've got 2 boats in the Caribbean that are. One's on a charter right now with the skipper, and the other one's just at the dock in Grenada getting some work done. Well, I'm not there. I have no control over that. I don't know what's happening with it. I can't keep an eye on it. So I worry about that. That creates this anxiety because I'm not sure what's happening, and that those are our assets. That they're the foundation of everything we do. If something happens to the boat that would delay a trip, that screws up the whole season. So that's like genuinely stressful. But then on the other side of it, you have, now that I'm home and away from the boats, I have more time to do whatever. So I can do more creative projects. I can work on the podcast. I can work on the website. I can do all this other stuff that I really enjoy doing. But I find that I don't know how to turn that off. I'm really struggling with this, like to the point where, I generally am I wouldn't say a worrier, but like I think about stuff all the time. I can't turn my brain off. And I just have a really hard time relaxing. And I'm finding now that I'm able to distract myself. Like I like to watch movies a lot when I'm home and work out in the yard, and I have a gym here on the farm, but it's just temporary, right? I have a very hard time finding peace when I'm just sitting still. And it's not even necessarily a bad thing. It's just, I wish I have this curse now of having figured out a way to make a living without quote unquote working. But now I don't really, there's no work-life balance, because there's the same thing. Work is life and vice versa. So if I figure that out, I'll let you know, but that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, but I would submit to you, Andy, that regardless of what you were doing in life, this thing that you just talked about is sort of baked into your personality.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that for sure.
Right?
For sure.
Yeah, that's just the way you are. I can remember years and years ago when my older son, who's now 38, we were trying to put him to sleep one night when he's like 3 or 4 years old. And he said exactly what you said. He goes, "Dad, I just can't turn my brain off."
Yeah.
So it's for
I
some
think
people.
My friend Ryan Ellison, he's also an entrepreneur, and he's very similar to personality to me. And I've learned a lot of good stuff from him, but some specific like tools to use to figure this out. And I'm realizing that like I need to just find some tools and do them. Almost like, I'm pretty active in exercising my body. I need to do the same thing for my brain. And one of the things is that Ryan taught me is, what did you enjoy doing as a kid? Just do that. And I realized, well, as a kid, I played with Legos a lot and I played video games. So I bought a PlayStation 4, and I have a whole bunch of Lego sets downstairs, and that's I'm actually finding that's like the best way for me to relax is I'll sit down at the living room table and I'll build a Lego set, and I've rediscovered that part of my brain. And weirdly enough, I was helping my friend with this engineering course thing he's working on, and it was math heavy, and I used to really, really like math in high school. I loved calculus, and I found that like by helping him out with this math stuff, that activated a part of my brain that I haven't used in a long time that I really, really enjoy. I really enjoy the learning when my brain is like in learning mode. So I think my next step is going to be to literally buy a calculus textbook and just sort of relive my junior year of high school and activate that part of my brain to. Maybe it's just another distraction, but it's some way to get myself to not think about the work stuff and do something different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, save your Legos because soon you will have someone to play Legos with.
Exactly. Yes. I have been saving all the boxes and the instructions and everything.
Right. Right. So let me ask you another question. Have you ever tried meditation?
Yes. And that's, gosh, I know that, like, of all things that could help, that's probably the biggest thing. It's just one of those, it's habits, right? Habits are hard to form and
Sure.
they're hard to change.
Yeah.
And I've dabbled with meditation for years on and off, but I've never been able to establish a good habit. And but yeah, it's something I think about.
Yeah. So on that topic, there's if you listen to podcasts, there's a podcast called 10% Happier. That's a sort of about meditation. It's not lessons in meditation, but it's sort of, philosophically about how it can help you if that's something you might be interested in listening into. It's one of the ones.
Yeah, that's cool. I've heard that. I've heard of that. I will put that on my list. And I guess, it's not to say like I am happy. I'm very happy. It's not about the happiness. I know what you mean by like 10% happier. It's just, it's not, that's not the issue. I'm not unhappy. It's just, I guess, restless is a better way to put it.
Right. Right. It's managing that restlessness and moving it into hopefully, and which you certainly have done, into positive energy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And making sure it keeps going positively, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect. So Andy, we've been at this 45 minutes or so, so I want to wrap it up. Respect your time. First of all, can you tell us the name of your podcast?
Yeah, well, we've got 3 now, actually, but the foundational one, the first one's called On the Wind, and that's the one that I enjoy doing the most. That's where I interview other sailors and people, see how they figured out this stuff and see what I could. Like I said, it was for me, first of all, and now just created an audience, and now suddenly those people want to sail with us. So yeah, On the Wind is the interview show. And then the one I've been working on lately is called How I Think About Sailing, and that's just me talking about some of this philosophical and practical stuff behind how I've sort of decided to do things specific to sailing. So those are the 2 of them.
And the name of your business, if someone wants to go sailing with you?
Yeah, it's called 59 North. So 59 degrees north sailing, and 59 North is the latitude of Stockholm, which is we don't live in Stockholm, but we live an hour west of Stockholm. So 59 North is the latitude of the farm that I'm talking to you from, and that's the name of the business.
Perfect. Well, I will make sure all 3 of those are in the show notes so people can find them. So Andy, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh man. No, I feel like we talk. I mean, I guess this is me. I feel like we talked mostly philosophical stuff, but I think that's everything that I do is based on that sort of thing. And like I said from the beginning, thankfully I've been able to figure out a way to make a meager income from it and make a really cool lifestyle. So no, I think that covered it. I guess one thing we didn't talk about, which I always emphasize, is like the stuff that how much of success is based on luck and things outside your control, the way you were raised, your parents. I mean, I give full credit to both my grandparents and my parents and my aunt and uncle, for that matter. We all grew up on the same property. They're all business people. They provided a very carefree childhood for me and an opportunity to think bigger than just maintaining your daily needs, and that had nothing to do with me. I was very lucky to not have to. My parents paid for my college and paid for that trip to Australia, and like it sounds, it's easy for me to say, oh yeah, I was real successful because I did all this stuff. Well, a lot of it was a foundation that I had nothing to do with, and I think you need to recognize that there's you got to give credit to that, because a lot of my success is down to the chances that came along the way that had nothing to do with me, if that makes sense.
Right. Very well said. And those chances that came along, you decided to act on them. And we all stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us, right? I mean, we all have that privilege.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, this has been great. I appreciate this. It's a long time coming, but this was a perfect timing because I've been able to reflect a little bit on this, and the business has been growing. So I hope your listeners learned something from it.
It's a great podcast. Thank you very much for doing it, Andy. I wish you and Mia success in all the things you undertake in the future, and especially the impending birth of your child. And that'll be a great thing in your life for sure.
Cool. Thanks again for having me.
You betcha. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bela, what a great story Andy had. I mean, at one point it sounded like it was a little bit nonlinear and he fell into this, but this was really, he's lived a life of carefully crafted experiences, I think, that follow each other naturally. And he's really in a place now in a world that he created and enjoying an incredible amount of success. So I think this was a really cool story to share with the listeners. Specifically, one thing that really struck me was when Andy said that his customers self-select. So he doesn't have to select customers. His customers find him. And only those that really are passionate and know what they're doing are the ones that actually sign up. So he doesn't have to do a lot of screening. And I thought about this, and messaging is so important, and Andy has done a great job of communicating. Like you said, he was an early podcaster. He's written articles in trade magazines, if you look at like Sale Magazine and things like that. And his website has an incredible amount of information, which we'll talk about a little later. Is this, though, a hidden secret of small business to really communicate and set expectations and allow your customers to choose themselves?
Well, I think it's something that you don't see very often. As I listened to Andy describe that, I think he really has a sort of a very interesting approach to it. And he's crafted this thing in a way that it does self-select. And you have to remember, on these trips, he has a finite number of berths available or cabins available on the boat. So as long as demand exceeds supply, right, this sort of works very, very well. And I think he's done a super job in sort of building his career and building his reputation. So you got to remember, he started as sort of, hey, I'm Andy Schell. I have this podcast all about sailing. I write these articles. I've done a lot of ocean sailing. And he built up his credibility to start with. And it wasn't until he had established himself as a credible person in this industry, then he went. Because prior to that, he worked for other people.
Sure, he was delivering boats. He was schlepping boats to people, right? This is not glamorous work, right? I mean, it's fun, but it's not glamorous.
That's right. And so he built up that credibility. He built up his sort of personality within the industry. And then once he had that groundwork laid, he then bought his first boat, and then he started this business, right? So if you think about it, it's very sort of well thought out, well planned, and maybe to Andy at the time it didn't seem that way, but if you reflect back on it, it really is, I think, superb. The other thing that I'll say is, here's an example of, I think, an individual who absolutely created something out of nothing. Right? He didn't start in the sailing industry. He didn't get a college degree in sailing and then got hired and started working for a large company. Right? He sort of built this from nothing. And I think that's another real true example of pure entrepreneurship. And I've always admired Andy as sort of being a pure entrepreneur.
That's cool. I totally agree, Bela. Let's look at the next phase of kind of his career and his growth strategy. What were your thoughts about how Andy's grown, trying to grow the business, right, from one person in a boat to a company that has a clear theme and there's multiple boats now and it's not just all about him?
Yeah. So I thought, when he did that, I said, oh boy, this is going to be interesting, because I followed along listening to his podcast, right? He talks about that. And he said he's going to buy a second boat. And I'm thinking to myself, oh gosh, when I ever thought about doing this, I'd say, I want to go sailing with Andy. That's the whole idea. He's the personality. He's the person you want to be with on the boat. And I asked him that question too during the interview. So you heard his response. Mm-hmm. But here again, he's done a great job at that. He has gotten other known personalities within the industry to join him. And he has done a superb job in sort of talking about, hey, listen, what you're really signing up for is an experience. And these people, these other captains who will take you out, can give you the same type of experience. And actually, a bunch of those folks have a lot more experience than Andy do. They've crossed oceans many more times than Andy. And so he hasn't been afraid to bring people into his organization that actually have a lot more experience than he has. And some of those folks were personalities long before Andy was a personality in the industry. So I think he's done a real clever job in sort of tackling that potential challenge that one might have in a business when you expand. Now, he also did talk about that his role has sort of changed, right? His role has changed from, gee, I'm just managing one boat and it's my wife, Mia, and I, and we're doing everything, to now I got other people taking boats out. And, so his sort of worries and the things that he has to focus on has also made a transition. And that's another great lesson for entrepreneurs, because in any business, as you go from yourself and one or two other people to 5 or 6 or 10 people, all of a sudden your role changes. And there's not a lot of people who are successful in making that transition.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the key that you mentioned, Bela, that's worth, I think, highlighting a little bit, is that this isn't just a growth strategy, it was also a pivot. It wasn't just a natural, I'll add locations, right? Like companies add more stores, or company adds more sales outlets, or companies add a new product line, okay? This was a pivot in how he does business and how the business is represented to customers. So I think that's really the key, is he really thought about this as a pivot, and moving from a company about me to a company about experiences and that. And the second piece is, and I think somebody else taught me this, but don't be afraid to hire people better than you, right? In fact, you should seek that out. And if you look at the website that he has, and you look at the people that are involved, he's surrounded himself with great people. And Andy said, I pay them double, and I really want to make them part of this. And I think that's really cool. So he's very quick on his website to give the team credit, and he, as he said, he compensates them well, and that's kind of the key. And it looks to me like he's built a human capital strategy kind of around growing these personalities like him. So he's built his own personality up, but I think he's also helping others around him gain that kind of voice and that kind of renown in this niche space, right?
Right. And as you're saying that, the pivot, another an element of the pivot is the pivot has gone from Andy Schell, the personality, to 59 North being the brand, right? So Andy Schell was sort of the brand for a while, the solo brand, and now he's slowly migrating that into 59 North being the brand.
Yep. This is a great lesson for anybody who's thinking about starting a business, and especially if it's something that relies on you as the founder. This is a great model. I mean, there's lots of prototypes, but this is a great prototype to do that growth pivot, to make the business more than just about you. And I think, listeners, if you want to check out, I think, this great example of this website that represents this, Andy's website, company's website is www.59-north.com, 59north.com with a dash in between.
And it's a great example of, I just think, a superb website that communicates the experience really well, really is very inviting, and talks about the people you will be with, right? Because you're going to be on a boat that's not very big, right? It's smaller than your house. You're going to be on there with 5 or 6 other people for like 5 to 10 days. So, some people will have some anxiety about that.
In dangerous conditions, too. Your life, it's not just, I got to get along with this person, I'm sharing a bathroom with them. It's like your life's dependent on them. If they screw up, you're in trouble, Right, exactly. So I think he attacks that problem really well on his website. And it's just a great example of a well-done website for a small business that I think checks all the boxes as I think about them. Yeah, I think I'm going to add this to my toolkit for my entrepreneurship class next semester, is to use it as an example of this idea of kind of growing your business beyond you, right? To this kind of pivot / growth model is a really great example.
Yeah, and let me just say one other thing about that. You see a lot of businesses that are 100% dependent upon the founder or the entrepreneur. And something happens to the entrepreneur or the founder, the business is gone. Fundamentally, all of the value is in that individual. And I would say 2 or 3 years ago, that was true of Andy's business. But now he's made this important and successful transition to making it not just about him. But, he's going to have a child. So that was another forcing function that sort of said, gee, I got to change my role here because it's not going to work. And I know they wanted to have a family for a while. So, okay, we got to tackle this problem. How are we going to do it? And he's come up with a great way of doing it. But it's also a lesson that other entrepreneurs can draw from to say, you got to be careful. If you make it just about you, then, if something happens to you, you don't have a business.
It's high risk. And the value of the business goes away. I mean, if you ever want to walk away, think about exit strategies, right? If the business is all about you and you want to exit, the business isn't worth very much to somebody else. But if you grow a business that's not all about you, that there's a value proposition that's there's resources in terms of your team, your human capital, the physical assets, right? You have a well-defined set of customer segments. Now you've got a business model that's saleable. So it's not, I totally agree that there's this risk that if you get hit by a bus, right, the business is kaput. But it's really creating a business that's valuable for somebody else to buy or acquire.
Right.
It's really got to be more than about the founder.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, one other quick thing I want to ask you before we wrap this up. So, you look at a business like Andy has, and you're pretty envious. You could say, wow, his passion is his business. And he sort of lives it every day. And then that strikes to this question of life-work balance, right? When your life is your work, how do you strike that balance? And how do you sort of think about that?
It's an interesting question, Bela, and I will tell you that the answer to this question for me has changed in the last 2 years. So I think I am as far away from Andy as one could possibly be on all personality traits. I'm the last person to do an ocean sail. I'm the last person to take risks. I don't like to be cold, all these things, right? But one thing that I share is that I kind of dreamed up this career for myself a long time ago, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. But I like to think of myself, and maybe I'm fooling myself, but I like to think I love what I do so much in terms of teaching and doing research and helping companies and helping students, that this to me is like my dream job. And I really also feel that my work and my life are somewhat mixed. I also am married to a wonderful human, Sandy, and she is in the same business. So we kind of share this. And so the difference between work and life has always been kind of a blurry line for me. But moving to Germany, there's much more clarity. There's a much clearer line than in the United States between work and life. You can see it in how people spend their free time. You can see it in how many hours. If you look at the data on how many hours people work, if you look at mandated holidays, people tend to take all of their vacation time, and you're foolish if you don't. If you're a little bit sick, you don't go to work, right? You're expected to stay home. All these things are really a strong part of the culture here in Germany. So it's changed a little bit about how I have work-life balance and trying to help to draw some clear boundaries, because it creates problems, in all honesty. If I'm working all the time and I'm answering student emails at 2 a.m. like I used to do in the U.S. on Saturdays and Sundays and holidays, and I always answer my email on vacation, which is, I think both you and I always have done that, right? Very responsive. But my colleagues here get a little mad because they're following the cultural norms and I'm making them look bad. So my colleagues are great, and they're very patient with me as somebody who's learning a new culture, that they explain these things to me. Don't do this and try not to do this. And this is a bad thing to do, even though it was good in the US. So I've had to adapt. So I have had to turn my email off on the weekends, and I wait until the morning to respond. And when I go on vacation, I go on vacation, not half and half. Not always. I'm still working on that one, honestly. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Sandy. I'm doing my best. My wife much prefers if I don't work on vacation. But so it's an interesting thing. And some of work-life balance issues I've learned from my experience in living and working in a different country depends on the culture you live in.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that Andy said, he's dusted off his Legos and he has figured out for him what the sort of what the things he can do that sort of shut out his work for a period of time, right? And we all need that. For me, it's running, right? Has been running for a long time. And so Andy found some things that work for him. And so there's an important lesson there that we all sort of figure out what that is for us. And we keep our mental health and well-being well balanced. As a couple of podcasts ago, we had a whole podcast about this practically.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about meditation a bunch of times. We're both big advocates of that, and it was you tried to push them a little bit, but it's not for everybody, right? But you got to have something, and you got to learn what works for you, And I think that's a great takeaway from this. No matter how hard driving you are and how culturally kind of this is my culture and I'm going to do it and make it work, your mental health is your most critical resource. I really thought, well, I don't know. Can you separate out physical and mental health? Maybe not. But the two of those together, if you don't have that, you don't have anything.
Yeah. Well, and they're related too. So time to wrap this up, Mike?
Sure. So takeaways today, I think. One is it's incredibly powerful to design a business around what you love to do. And today, your interview with Andy is just a testament to that. It's important to have a tightly focused customer niche to really understand your segments like Andy did or does, to create a brand with meaning that you can communicate effectively using a variety of channels like Andy has evolved his business into. And the philosophy of the business is sometimes just as important as the operational nuts and bolts. And it was really cool that you could talk to Andy a lot, and Andy could so clearly state his philosophies about the business and about life and how that's helped drive a successful small business. It's a great example. I love the quote that Andy's mom wrote that he talked about, that he had tattooed in his arm: hold fast to your dreams. And I think that's a really cool guiding principle that obviously Andy has taken to heart and has really built a business around. So it's a great story, Bela. Thanks for doing the interview.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was fun.
Yeah, so we're happy, listeners, that you joined us in our podcasting adventure for this week. And we hope you found the last hour as interesting and thought-provoking as we did. At this point, we'd like to once again thank Phillips Lytle LLP for sponsoring our podcast. If you need good, solid advice starting, funding, or selling a business, whether you're a single-person startup or working on a 9-figure exit, Bela and I confidently recommend the attorneys at Phillips Lytle. Bela, what's the best way for listeners to get in touch with them?
So the person to call is Rich Honan, who's a Phillips Lytle partner. And you can call him at 518-618-1225. Or you can reach him via email at rhonan@phillipslytle.com. And you can always find his contact information in our show notes, along with all of the contact information for Andy Schell and 59 North.
Bela, last question. You going to sign up for a trip?
I've thought about it, and I think that I'm good for when I sailed this past summer from Nova Scotia down to Annapolis, I discovered that 3 or 4 overnights is enough for me out in the ocean. And Andy takes longer trips. And whereas I know it'll be a great experience and I'd learn a lot, I have also, I'm very comfortable going, 2 or 3 or 4 nights, and that's enough.
That's 2 or 3 or 4 nights longer than me, but it's good. You got to know your limits, Bela. All right. Thanks for joining us this week. If you have questions about what we've discussed, suggestions about topics or potential guests, please do get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
And please do subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. We have lots of great guests in the pipeline. So until next week, signing off from upstate New York. Mike, have a great week.
Sounds great, Bela. That's it from over here in Münster, Germany. Bye.